Welcome to the campus of North Idaho College and today's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to invite you back to the program and to deal with a very fascinating topic, Bigfoot. We've had this 2 or 3 times before on our program over the years, and we are most fortunate to have back as the person who has always dealt with this subject. I would consider him probably the best expert in this country on this subject. Our guest is Dr. Grover Krantz, who is a professor of anthropology at Washington State University. Dr. Krantz holds a baccalaureate degree and a master's from the University of California at Berkeley, receiving his baccalaureate in 1955, his master's in 1958, and he also holds a PhD degree in the field of anthropology from the University of Minnesota, received in 1971. He has been on the faculty at Washington State University since 1968. Dr. Krantz, you certainly are reaching that point of almost holding one of our records of having more appearances on our show than most people, and we're happy to welcome you back once again.
Well, it's fine to be here.
I'm happy to welcome to the panel to assist in the questioning of our guest today, first of all, Richard Snyder, an anthropologist at North Idaho College, regular panelist Mary Lou Reed, and from the Department of English, Jim McLeod. And Mr. McLeod has been with us in the past. It's been some time, and we want to welcome you back. It's a pleasure having you back.
Thank you, Tony.
We'll start the questioning with Richard Snyder.
Dr. Krantz, at the risk of introducing levity into this, there seems to be a rather large two-legged creature with a hair-covered body and bad breath running around out in the woods. Can you give us some kind of description of this creature?
Well, you've almost described it right there, but I could add a little bit. It's two-legged, walking around like in the same manner as the human being, with arms hanging to the side. The biggest difference comes in 2 areas. Its size, where we're saying about 8 feet tall, 800 pounds is a typical body size, and that it's covered with hair and definitely not human. It's a hair-covered animal.
Lou Reed.
Well, does it really have bad breath? I think that there are some question about whether or not this creature smells. In some of the sightings, I understand, or the smellings, there have been identification of a rather rank smell. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, briefly, yes, many people report an extremely obnoxious odor, like an unwashed, uncleansed human that's just gone completely to seed. Whether they got bad breath or not, I don't know if anyone's been up close enough to check that, but it's just body odor that's incredible.
Could you give us some of your update? You have recent findings, and you say now that you have definitive proof that Bigfoot exists. What has made you feel more definite about it?
Okay, the definitive proof, that's an interesting use of the word. I sometimes use it myself. It's proof in the form of what we call dermal ridges on the feet. As we have fingerprints on our fingers and all over the palms of our hands, we also have these same ridges and furrows on our feet. And any other higher primate, though not other animals, would also have these. So the Sasquatch, or Bigfoot, since it's presumably related to humans and apes, we would expect it to show these. Well, now we have some footprints in extremely fine soil where these ridges are recorded. And this is not surprising. If the soil is fine enough, this does happen. And these are presently being studied by a number of fingerprint experts, and some of them are willing to stick their necks out now and say that absolutely this is a real creature and there's no way it could have been faked.
Jim McLeod.
Why haven't these ridges appeared before, Dr. Krantz? It would seem that the sightings have been going on for so many years that it would seem that by now someone would have noticed these before. They would have come to the attention of the public before this.
Well, you need an unusual combination of extremely fine soil and the right degree of moisture content, and you have to have them observed and cast within a day or so, and in most cases less than that, after they were first planted, in order to get the preservation. Now, I've made quite a study very rapidly in the last few months trying to track down other footprint casts, and I find there are some dermal ridges on a few others, but they are so fine they just simply hadn't been noticed. Still, the ones we just got last summer are by far the best ones.
Well, when you say definitive proof, do you think this is going to convince, say, people in your own profession that in anthropology that this creature does exist? Is this the sort of thing that sort of evidence that you've been looking for to convince them?
Well, when I first saw these ridges, I had hoped that it might be this kind of proof, but it's beginning to look like, no, the anthropologists are still very resistant. Some are moving from the skeptical to the neutral category, some from the neutral to the affirmative category, but it's not a wholesale movement. It's not as good as I had hoped for. The fingerprint experts are much more amenable to the idea, and most of them will agree that it's probable or real. Anthropologists are very reluctant because they've been, for the most part, consistently ignoring and refusing to investigate this creature, so they've got a vested interest in its non-existence, and I think it's rather upsetting to them that it maybe is real.
Why do you think they have that vested interest?
Well, it's never been in the books, it's never been in their works up until now, and it's such a large and such obvious animal that I think they'd feel quite foolish if they would have to acknowledge that they've missed it. Another aspect to this, by the way, is some of you may remember the Piltdown man found in England that turned out to be a hoax. Well, physical anthropology was really rocked by that one and lost a lot of credibility, and it's been in the process of trying to recover from that ever since the early 1950s. And now, if the Sasquatch turns out to be real, and the physical anthropologists have missed that one too, they're afraid that the credibility of their whole field will start being questioned. If they miss the Sasquatch, what else might they have missed?
Dr. Krantz, in relation to Bigfoot, and I'm sure our viewers would be interested in knowing this, you've mentioned the fact that you have found some new prints in the last year, and I really have a two-part question. Where were those found at? And secondly, what areas of the United States or other parts of the world are we talking about where Bigfoot would most likely, in your opinion, reside, or what area would they inhabit?
Okay, the prints that caused this recent excitement were found in the Umatilla National Forest. That's in the northern Blue Mountains on the border between Washington and Oregon, towards the eastern edge. Some of the prints were found on the Oregon side and some on the Washington side, and subsequent ones have been found in that area since. Now, this is a fairly high, though not extreme, mountainous area, well forested for the most part, though there's some grazing in some of the areas. And just about any terrain that matches that is likely to have Sasquatch or Bigfoot in anywhere in the western U.S. So it has to be forested and a reasonable rainfall, certainly over 20 inches rainfall, usually over 40. Mountainous, usually, but not always. And as long as there's not a dense human occupation, there could be Sasquatch.
Richard Snyder.
Dr. Krantz, at another time, at least once, you've advocated shooting one Bigfoot if the opportunity presents itself. Why would you want to do that? And secondly, what sorts of ramifications could come from the shooting of one? Is there any chance of being accused of murder? Who are we dealing with? What would happen if one were shot? Would you care to go into that?
Oh, I'm going to have fun with this one. Yes, I do advocate shooting one. On one level, straight from the scientific point of view, we want to find out for sure that the animals are there, bring in the proof that would satisfy everybody, and bones would. And we want to find out exactly what it is. Is it something that we already know of from the fossil record, as I suspect, or is it something new? Now, beyond determining that, there's another, I should think, much more humanistic aspect to it. I've frequently been criticized, sometimes verbally and sometimes in letters, for advocating this because they say we shouldn't be cruel to these animals and we might shoot the last one and so on. Well, it is possible that these are an endangered species. And if so, we humans may be doing something with our logging and road building and pollution that may drive them to extinction in the near future. If so, we are going to continue doing this, and we will lose the Sasquatch, and most people will not know about it. However, if we prove that they exist, if one body is brought in, then the scientific establishment will have to acknowledge they are real, and all the environmental impact laws require that they be studied in great detail. And we may then find out that there's something we can do to help them.
What about the situation of murder in the case of shooting one?
Okay, well, I have been assured by several people already that if I shoot one, they will bring murder charges against me. I don't worry too much about that because at the present time, my own opinion and the opinion of the people who have studied it most thoroughly, and that would be, for instance, John Green and René de Hinden in Canada, and myself, we are in unanimous agreement that this thing behaves like an animal. All the available information today is that it is not human or even semi-human in intelligence. Therefore, on the basis of this evidence, one can proceed to shoot one legally. Now, if the body is brought in and somebody wants to bring charges, then, and I'm taken up for a murder charge, they will have to call in the best, most recognized expert on the subject of the humanity of this creature to speak in my defense. That happens to be me. And so I think I've got an airtight case.
Lou Reed.
Constitutional protection also. Dr. Krantz, there are other kinds of evidence that we all are very curious about, and such as nests and hair and diet and scat and dead bodies. Do you have any new evidence that would, any more physical proof that would back up your belief in Sasquatch?
Unfortunately, in all those areas that you've mentioned, no, we have nothing new. A few additional specimens of hair, for instance. Some more, I've got 2 recent rumors of caves that may have been inhabited by them. But again, they haven't been checked out by myself or anyone who would really know what to make of it. But we have the dermal ridges on the footprints now that is the overwhelmingly new
additional proof. But how do you, in your own mind, sort of figure out why there are no more sightings and why there are no more physical evidences of existence?
Well, actually, we are getting more sightings. These are coming in regularly, but nothing really new, just more of the same. As to the other physical evidence, there are several things to keep in mind. Number one, this is a relatively rare animal. There are probably hundreds of bears for every one Sasquatch. Second, what they are doing to the environment in terms of tearing up vegetation and building dens is probably, in most cases, very similar to what the bears are doing. And if people run across this, they will, in most cases, just assume that they've run across evidence of bears, and they can't tell the difference. Now, there may be other things that are a little bit more detailed, where some good woodsman can tell, yes, this is Sasquatch and it's not bear. But in many cases, these good woodsmen are just going to shut up about it because they know nobody's going to believe them.
I must sound awfully skeptical, but when you're saying that there are more sightings, what is the rate of sightings? How frequently do they come in?
Well, this is a little bit hard to judge, but the best measure of that is the Canadian John Green, who until very recently, about a year ago, he quit doing this, but he had a number of people in an information network, about 15 or 20 people, who would send him reports that they picked up in newspapers or verbal reports. He would summarize them and mail copies to all of the people every month. Now, I, of course, would estimate about half of these are erroneous reports, but he would come out with maybe 20 reports every month. And if 10 of those are correct, you've got better than 2 a week.
If you've joined our program in progress, our guest today is Dr. Grover Krantz, who's an anthropologist teaching at Washington State University, and he is here to discuss with us the issue of Bigfoot. We shall continue the questioning with Jill McLeod.
Dr. Krantz, how do you, assuming that you were someone who just ran across some footprints out in the woods somewhere that looked very strange to you and quite large and so on, how would you know roughly that they were genuine, or how can you tell the fakes from the real? Of course, prints have been faked, we know that, but
right.
How would a person go about knowing this?
Well, the most obvious thing is first to walk along the trail right next to it, and I say this deliberately, walk, don't just step. You'll go in a striding gait right next to it and see how the depth of imprint of your feet compares to the footprints that you just looked at. If your footprints go in deeper than these footprints that you're looking at, then you know it's a fake, because that means that somebody has been wearing gigantic carved or somehow modeled feet and is snowshoeing off over the surface of the ground, putting his body weight on a much larger surface. However, if the footprints go in deeper than yours, then you are probably dealing with something that weighs 4 or 5 times as much as you do. And this is not the sort of thing that can be easily faked. Now, another test of it is if the creature is walking rapidly, they will kick dirt into their own track. And with a rigid foot, the dirt will be kicked right behind the toes. On a flexible foot, it will be kicked in the middle of the foot, approximately. And this way, of course, this still doesn't necessarily eliminate fakes, but it means the faker has to be much more sophisticated.
What about stride?
Stride, that can be matched sometimes, but not always. The stride of an animal, a biped, is usually roughly half of the standing height. And if you have a stride measuring from the heel of one to the heel of the next imprint, and it's 4 feet long, you're probably dealing with something standing 8 feet tall, unless you've got reason to think it's running. Now, the way to test for that is you walk by the print and see to what degree the soil is pushed up around the outside of your footprint, and then run by or stamp on the ground very hard. And you'll usually get a difference. When you walk, the dirt will be pushed sideways and rise up around your foot. When you're running, it'll be knocked way out to the side and not leave a little mound around your footprint. And then you compare what your walking and your running does with what you see in the animal or the new track, and you can make your judgment then. If it seems to be running and it has 4-foot stride, then you suspect a fake.
Richard Snyder.
After the Umatilla Forest sighting of last June, a professional tracker, whose name I cannot recall,
Joel Hardy.
Yes, proclaimed these prints to be fakes based on his years of experience at tracking animals and so forth and so on. Can you give us a response to his claim that they're fakes?
Well, he made a number of observations. One of them was that when the creature is walking downhill and it's walking uphill, it has the same stride. Well, in some cases, yes, this is the case. Now, while that does look rather odd for an animal, usually you get shorter strides going uphill and longer downhill. If you try that on for size with a human wearing fake feet, it makes that impossible too. So that doesn't clarify the matter. A human faking the feet would certainly walk with shorter strides going uphill. But if you have an 800-pound bipedal animal with incredible strength, if it wanted to, it could walk uphill with the same stride as downhill, no problem. So while that is an odd pattern of walking, it doesn't point to fakery. He also claimed that in some places the footprints were not terribly deep in the ground, where the ground was soft, and in other places they were in fact very deep, but he said they showed evidence of being ground in. Now, what exactly was meant by that, I'm not sure, but I presume that he assumes the cast was held and worked into the ground by shaking and moving it back and forth. Well, that doesn't work because these are in fact the ones where the dermal ridges show, and they would have been wiped out by just a single slight movement. Now, there are a few other things that bothered him, but I don't find any problem with them. What I think was really going on is he was quite sure there was no such thing as a Sasquatch to begin with, and therefore he knew they had to be faked when he saw the tracks, and it was just a matter of finding whatever seemed a little bit odd to him, add up all those things, and then pronounce it a fake on that basis.
Just to follow that up for a moment, to your knowledge, had this man ever investigated possible Sasquatch footprints before?
To my knowledge, no. I haven't heard anything about it.
So this was his first experience with these footprints?
As far as I know, yes.
Lou Reed.
Dr. Krantz, you have devoted years of your life to this issue of Sasquatch. Are there a number of people working in this field in the same intensity that you are?
Yes, but none of them are established scientists. They're all amateurs or just ordinary folk.
Well, who are they? I mean, who are they? What kinds of types are they, and what kinds of time? Are they devoting summers or full-time?
Nobody's working full-time on it. I would suppose I'm probably working as much as most people. Maybe 10% of my time is devoted to the subject in one form or another. One Canadian, René de Hinden, is probably working on it a good deal more than I am. Everybody else probably the same or less. Most of us have to earn a living, and I do this in my own spare time. This is not my university function, and they have the same kind of problems.
I assume that there are no academic dollars that are going toward the pursuit of Bigfoot.
That's right.
How about as a master's thesis topic, or is there any research that students are able to do that can back you up?
That depends on the university, on the department, and the personnel who are in charge there. I have not been able to even feel free to suggest it to any of my students, because some of the people in my university are so dead set against it, they would probably try to get me fired if I tried that.
Well, what would be your ideal dream of some sort of setup? Would you like to have a Sasquatch research foundation or something like that?
Not at the present time, not unless we have awful lot of money and we have already proven they existed and we're going out and studying them. What I would like to see at the present time is people studying studying the environment and the possibility of creatures like this, but this should not be in an anthropology department. It should be in a wildlife department or biology, something like that. Once they find the remains of one, of course, that should then shift back to anthropology.
Thank you.
Jim McLeod.
Dr. Krantz, it's my impression, and I guess it's just an impression, I'm not a scientist, but that the scientific community I think of as normally being open-minded about the world around us. It's probably a misperception on my part, but it doesn't seem to me that, based on what you've been saying today earlier about the scientific establishment and some of the comments you just made, that the scientific community is very open-minded about issues of this sort. What's your view of that? What's going on there?
Okay, your impression, I would say, is basically correct. I sometimes sound a little bit bitter about this, but basically, no, the scientific establishment is not interested in discovering new things, only in working out minor details of what's already known. Something that's really new, that's going to change basic attitudes, what one of the workers calls a paradigm change, these are resisted by scientists, simply because they have a vested interest in a field of science as it is. And if somebody's going to shake it up drastically by introducing a new thing or taking out a major thing or shifting boundaries, the established scientists may suddenly find themselves out of work, or that their work is no longer important, or it's been shifted into another area. So they're most interested in keeping the status quo as steady as possible, so that, and they have their own area neatly blocked out, secure, and then they can work on some little tiny detail in there.
Well, I've been interested too in the organization that you're co-founder of, Cryptozoology. Is there a tendency now among some scientists in this country to be more interested in anomalies such as Bigfoot, that sort of thing? Is that gaining some strength?
I'm not sure if it's gaining. These mavericks have been around all the time. I think what's going on here is, as children, we heard about what science is supposed to be, and so we go into it. Most of us, as we get into science, we learn that really that's not the way it is, and we shape up. But there's a lot of us also who still keep this idealistic dream about science, and we are pretty much individuals. We don't fit in very well, we quite often drop out, but some of us manage to struggle along. Cryptozoology has just simply been an attempt to gather together those of us who still have this idealistic idea about science. And as I say, of course, we're all individualists, so we don't coordinate terribly well. But I think people like us have been around all the time. We're just getting a little bit organized now.
Dr. Krantz, on previous visits to our campus and on this program, you have indicated that there have been some movies made, oftentimes by non-professional individuals that claim they saw Bigfoot and they got that on film. And you have indicated to us that some of those are easy to determine that they're fake. And yet there was one in particular that she was impressed with. Since your previous appearance here, do we have any more footage on film of Bigfoot? What is the status of that particular part of the research?
Okay, basically there are no additional films. I can't think of any that have come out since I was here before. If any of them were since then, they are probably fakes. However, I can add a comment about the one, that's a Roger Patterson film of 1967. That's now being worked on by a photographer who has the original film, not a copy of it, and is making some extremely good quality single prints from each frame. And I had the opportunity of examining about 12 of them. And it shows a good deal more clearly than anyone who's ever seen the movie before. Now you can look at it and you can see the eyes and the nostrils and the mouth, which were just a little blur in the previous movie. I also did something that was kind of fun. Viewed two of the frames in stereoscopic vision. Instead of course, the usual stereoscopic is you have two cameras at the one subject, but you can get the same result if the subject rotates slightly and you take two pictures from where the subject is changed. You put the two pictures up, view them stereoscopically, that is one eye on each, and you get a three-dimensional picture. And there are several pairs of them, of the Sasquatch face and head, that if you view them that way, it just leaps out at you. You can see the contour of the head very beautifully. But it may be some months or years before these are released publicly.
Richard Snyder.
Well, I'd like to take 15 seconds and announce that Jim and I are attempting to keep track of sightings of Sasquatch in northern Idaho, and that should any member of the audience have made a sighting, see footprints, or have had something in the past, please give us a call. We would like to record this on a map. I think, Dr. Krantz, you're really convinced that this is true. Is that so?
Yes, I've been convinced since about 12 years ago, but the evidence I had then was not sufficient really to convince someone else. I think I'm getting closer to it, though, now.
And what remains is either the skeleton of a dead animal or the body of one that just recently died.
Right. I would far prefer the skeleton of a dead one, because the skeleton is the part that I work with, and it's what we can compare with the fossil record. A body of a freshly killed or recently died one, of course, that will be almost half a ton of smelly flesh wrapped around that nice skeleton that I want to see. Yeah. But many of my colleagues will want to see the soft parts.
Lou, we have about a minute.
Dr. Krantz, I admire your conviction, but is it a lonely position?
It used to be a very lonely position. It's raising a little bit in prestige now, and I find there's a lot more people in the same position.
What keeps you going?
Just determination to discover something new, I guess.
With that, I have to bring our program to conclusion. I'm sorry we're out of time. Dr. Krantz, it's been a privilege as always to have you on our program, and you've been very kind to always visit our campus, and we appreciate that very much.
Well, it's been a pleasure for me, too.
I express my appreciation to the panel also. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Dr. Grover Krantz, an anthropologist from Washington State University, discussing Bigfoot. I hope you've enjoyed our program and this subject, and I would like to take this opportunity to invite you to be with us again next week at this very same time, when we'll move to a new topic, a different subject, and I hope you'll be with us and that you'll find that topic as interesting as we find it in bringing it to you. Please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.